Midweek Murders contains graphic and explicit content. Listener discretion is advised.
I'm thinking that I might do like a welcome to Midweek Murders. And it's time to talk about crime, like separately, because saying welcome is so awkward.
Do whatever you feel comfortable doing. I will support you.
Aww, I wish you were my mom.
I am. Bum, bum, bum. Tune in next week for the reading of the DNA test. Will Sandra find out who her real parents are? Will Joe disclose the mystery of how he gave birth to a child? Play the jingle.
Some more beer.
I heard.
And now I just feel like, this podcast, it wasn't really a good idea, was it?
No.
We'll just have a website, and then it'll be like an internet mystery forever, like the podcast that never was. Like, did anyone ever find...
the ones that got murdered?
I should put up some of the, like... I've made a card for the episodes so that we can fill it in later on.
Podcast pending.
I should just put up hundreds of them, and then someone somewhere will find it being like, what? There's no, like, audio recordings.
Did we not press record? God damn it, we've been doing this for years.
The ultimate unresolved mystery. We'll be famous.
But we don't have to pretend to be dead. We'll be famous.
Although, if they start looking for, like, your internet presence, being like, is this a real person? They won't find
the mystery.
Okay, I've made notes, and it looks like someone had a stroke in the middle of making notes, because
That's
it's
just
that
your handwriting.
bad. Yeah, I know, and it's that bad. Okay, this week we're going to talk about the case of Sergei and Yulia Skripal.
I feel like you should probably know how to pronounce their names when you're doing a podcast on them.
Skripal.
No offense, Sergei and Yulia, if you're out there.
Skripal?
Skripal.
Oh, yeah, probably. And I got my research from BBC News, The Guardian, and The Guardian article written by Stephen Morris and Caroline Bannock, and also Wikipedia. Wikipedia. I think it started like with them finding Sergei and Yulia on a bench the 4th of March, 2008, 17? 18?
18.
Oh, good. Well, somebody did their research, and it wasn't me.
It's going to be a long podcast, man.
Yeah, I know, right? And it won't be any material that we can use. Okay, so I kind of figured from the articles that they figured out that they were poisoned quite quickly, right?
Well, they were found unconscious on the bench.
Yeah, but it could have been, something else.
I don't know what they were treated for immediately. I would assume resuscitation.
Yeah, and then they, started barring off the house and stuff quite quickly, didn't they?
Yeah, it's quite easy to tell if you've been poisoned in terms of blood work. So I guess they found that out pretty quickly, determined what it was, and then decided that because it's quite easily spread, they needed to quarantine, much like the situation we're in now.
I burped while you were talking. Did you hear that?
I did not hear that, but
I'm
now
glad.
The listeners know.
I tried to do it really quietly. So how long would you say, blood test comes back?
blood tests can be returned within the hour. And given that they
Oh,
would have been sent to A&E, yeah, most hospitals have a 60-minute turnaround time for blood tests. So they would have found out pretty quickly.
okay. So I looked at a timeline for the case, and it was Mr. Petrov and Mr. Boshirov arrived in London on the 2nd of March. So that's 2 days before. Obviously, that's not their real names, but that's what it said on their passports, which I find is quite weird. Like, how could they? Well, I guess it's not that hard to fake a passport, but I mean, like, the vial. How did they ship the vial?
Well, the particular poison that they used was first discovered when they were looking for different types of pesticides. So it's perfectly feasible that it was marketed to customs import, whoever would have looked at it, if anyone looked at it, as generic pesticide. But if they
But why
packed
would
it
someone
Go on.
bring pesticide to another country?
It's not really a question that customs ask. If it's not on their restricted list, then it's not a problem. But it's also the same question as how do people get guns and knives on planes? I think that's a whole different topic of research.
Okay. I was also reading that Yulia flied in from Russia on the 3rd. And I was like, what the fuck are the odds?
So
I
she
don't.
went to visit him, didn't she? She
Yeah.
wasn't living with him.
No,
So
and that's the
I
thing.
feel like she's probably an innocent party in this,
I
and
think
that she wasn't the target.
No, I think that was accidental, but also what are the odds that she flies in on the 3rd, one day after the Russian guys flew in and one day before Sergei and Julia was found poisoned? That's quite crazy.
I think she's probably asking the same question.
Yeah, probably. Then I read that Yulia and Sergei kind of go to different parts of Salisbury. Salisbury? Sorry, I could say it before we recorded, and then I was like, wait, can I say this? So they went to the pub, which I feel is
Understandable.
Like, you go to England, of course, the first stop is going to be the pub. Except for Petrov and Boshirov's alibi. They were like, ooh. It was so funny. I watched the video when they gave, like, a interview. And I think that was for like a Russian news outlet or something. I don't remember. But it was so funny. They were like, yeah, our friends have been telling us for so long that you need to visit this wonderful town of Salisbury. And one of them is like, yeah, the cathedral isn't just known in Europe. It's also known around the world. Because it has this type of clock tower and this thing and blah, blah, blah. And he just gives the exact numbers of like how tall it is and stuff like that. And I was like, this is so beyond what a normal conversation would be like. Like, first of all, nobody recommends Salisbury to another person.
What if you want to go to Stonehenge? Which, I'll have you know, is a World Heritage Site. Thank you very much. You're welcome, Salisbury listeners.
It would have been more normal if they were like, yeah, we went to see Stonehenge. But they didn't say that now, did they?
Well, they probably needed to cover their tracks as to why they were in and around the area where Sergei and Yulia were found unconscious.
Yeah, they were spotted by CCTV on like the street next to where he lived. And the poison was sprayed on the door handle, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was administered dermally.
Yeah, they went to the pub, and then they went to a restaurant. Not the Russian guys, Sergei and Yulia. And it's supposed to be so crazily poisonous, this poison thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they, as it seemed, they walked around for a long time before they fell unconscious.
Well, I don't know, and I don't think it was ever established where the first point of contact with the poison was. I know they found it on his door handle to his house, but that doesn't mean to say that there wasn't any that was also administered at the pub or in the restaurant.
I think they kind of figured out that it must have been the door handle because that was the highest like concentration of it. Because in the pub they found like traces of it, but the traces came from Sergei and Yulia.
I mean, I can see why they would do it as a precautionary measure, given that you need such a low dose to actually succumb to symptoms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess so. And they must have sprayed such a tiny, tiny amount if they were conscious for so many hours after having touched the doorknob.
Do
right?
we have a timeline between doorknob, pub, and restaurant?
Yeah, I didn't write it up, unfortunately, but it was like hours. They went to the cemetery because Sergei's wife and his son was buried in the cemetery. So they went to the cemetery to like visit their family's graves. So it kind of felt like that was the last stop, but they had spent hours at the restaurant particularly.
Quite possibly. I mean, not a lot of toxicity data is available about the particular poison that was used because it is a banned substance. It's outlawed under multiple international laws. So there's not going to be studies about the efficacy with respiration versus dermal contact. I assume it's going to take longer to impact you through skin contact than it would aspirated straight into the lungs.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But also, not a doctor.
Hashtag not a doctor. So, some history about Sergei. He was sentenced in 2006 in Russia for spying for the UK. So he had been selling information about Russian spies to MI6 for years. I think they said like from the 1940s something. And then he was a part of like, what are you doing?
Stirring my dinner.
Are you cooking dinner?
Yeah. I've got to eat. Start that line again. We'll edit that out.
Colonel Skripal, he had been selling information about Russian secret agents and stuff like that from the 1940s.
Yeah, so he was a double agent, wasn't he? So originally he was a spy for Russia and then changed sides and started leaking war secrets to MI6.
Yeah.
Which is why he was a target eventually from the Russians.
Yeah. There was a website or a investigative website called Bellingcat that had tried to ID the Russians, Mr. Boshirov and Petrov. His name on the passport was like Alexander Petrov, I think, but that's obviously not what they were called. Also, it's very funny in that interview I talked about. The interviewer is like, oh, but what do you do? Like, what do you work with? And they were like, oh, we can't say that because then you're gonna, like, the people we work with are gonna be subject to harassment, blah, blah, blah. She was like, but just tell us anything. Like, why should we believe you? What do you actually do for a living? And they were like, let's just say we work in fitness. Which was like, what?
Perfectly rational area of work.
But also, spoiler alert, they don't work with fitness. So Bellingcat, the investigative website that I mentioned, had dug up an image of a Colonel Anatoly Shepiga.
Anatoly?
Yeah, something along those lines. And he obviously works for the Russian government. And the other guy is a doctor, and he also works for the Russian government. Surprise, surprise. And then also, they had contact with another Russian guy in England at the time that had contact with the Russian government. So
It's
it
all
was,
starting to sound a bit suspicious.
it was the Russian government, obviously. And funny thing is that I actually started like doing my research on Reddit. There was a lot of posts about Trump saying to Theresa May that I don't think the Russians had anything to do with it. Well, obviously everybody knows Trump's an idiot. But
I think, to be fair, politics at the time was probably not the most reliable source of information, given that the UK Foreign Secretary was a certain Boris Johnson.
mm-hmm.
Putin was asked to comment on the case, and his response was something like, "You sort out the issues there, then we'll talk." Which I feel like, when you've been directly accused of murdering ex-Soviet spies, you might want to have a bit more of a firm comment than "we'll talk later."
But the Russian propaganda machine is so horribly successful in Russia that they made some research about what the Russian population thinks about this, and most people think that Russia had nothing to do with it in Russia, but obviously they did.
Well, didn't something like 36% of people surveyed say that they'd never heard of the case before?
Yeah, that too.
Which, I mean, it seems like an unbelievable statistic when just looking at it. But then, how remote are some areas in Russia that they're going to hear about an ex-Soviet spy who was discreetly attempted to be killed?
Yeah, no, I get it. I just feel like I've seen like documentaries about how they use the news in Russia, and it's very effective, like against their population, and also how they use hackers, lol, and bots and stuff to destabilize every big democracy in the world. It's crazy. But getting back to the case, sorry that was a tangent about conspiracies. They did find traces of Novichok, the poison, in the hotel room of these two guys as well. So it's pretty clear that it was them.
It's pretty damning evidence.
And then they were found on the 4th of March, right?
Around about then, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't
and
test
then
me on that.
I prepared a quiz. How much did you pay attention to me? And how much did you pay attention to making dinner? I'm kidding.
30-70.
So the 30th of June. Did I say that correctly?
That's a date, yep.
That's a date. All right, we'll go with that. Dawn Sturgess collapses in her flat. No, it was her friend's flat or her boyfriend's flat, foaming at the mouth. And at first, the police said that they thought that it was drugs, like heroin or something that was mixed with something else.
Yeah.
And then it
turns very dodgy.
Turns out that it's the same substance that Sergei and Yulia was poisoned with. And her friend or boyfriend, differing reports on that, Charlie Rowley, also got sick. And he said that this was also varying depending on which article I was reading, but he said that he had found a perfume bottle that was sealed in its box in a charity bin 3 days prior. And some friends of his, or them, said that he regularly scavenged like recycling bins for items to resell. So I don't really know when he actually found the perfume. But if he says that it's 3 days prior, then probably, I don't know. Like Amesbury, right? Do you know
Amesbury, yeah.
how far from Salisbury is that?
No idea.
Okay.
Listeners, comment below.
We don't have a comment section on the website.
Listeners, tweet us.
If we ever go into Twitter, yeah, sure.
At Midweek Murders.
And
Hashtag Sergei and Yulia. Hashtag not a doctor.
let's not rope them into this. There is innocent bystanders. This podcast is gonna be shit. So, Dawn Sturgess goes like into a coma or something. She was on life support.
Mm-hmm.
And in that Guardian article that I referenced, they interview her mom and dad because she did die, or she was taken off life support after a while. And then they said that she was so contagious that they weren't allowed to touch her. And the mom had been stroking her hair, and then she reached for her face to wipe a tear because she was crying, and the doctors had been like, don't touch your face. And I was like, what in the hell? The thing is, like, she's lying in the hospital. Obviously, they must have removed the clothes and, like, burned them or something because they must have been contagious. But that she can still be that contagious, or not contagious, but, like, that poisonous is crazy to me.
Well, again, it comes down to the difference between aspiration and dermal contact. So if she's been exposed to the nerve agent through a perfume bottle, that's immediately aspirating into the air. So you've got a whole load more contamination points than you would by opening a contaminated door.
Yeah.
So they have to take considerations into that, and given that it was confirmed as the same nerve agent, it's like having an Ebola outbreak. You have to treat everything as highly contagious because you just don't know what's contaminated, how easily it can pass on.
The only like reference point I have to that is when I watched Chernobyl, the series, and like obviously they were radioactive. Everyone, all of the first responders, the firefighters, etc., was so contaminated that their clothes are still contaminated today.
Yeah,
Like,
well, Madame Curie, who discovered radium, her notebook is still contaminated and gives off a lethal dose of radiation. I think it's stored in a lead box and can't be accessed by anyone without like proper radiation protection suits. So stuff like that can stick around for years and years and years. And this particular nerve agent is really, really difficult to get rid of. You can't just wash it away. If it gets into the water cycle, then the water cycle is contaminated. Because so little is known about it, the treatment and cleanup procedures have to be the highest order and the most severe, just to make sure that you're reducing the risk of spread.
yeah, her friend or boyfriend, probably boyfriend, Charlie, he said that he had probably contracted it while handling the bottle. Like that's why he was poisoned, probably. And she sprayed it on her wrist, and that's why she died, which is horrible, but I feel like it's so crazy that, like, I don't know, that everything gets so extremely contaminated by that little of, like, a poison.
Well, that's exactly the reason that chemical warfare is declared a war crime, and that it's banned internationally.
Yeah, no, I get it, but it was very peculiar. Just like, what's the chances? How did that perfume bottle end up in a recycling bin or a charity bin? Like, that's crazy as well.
Well, it seems most likely that the guys that attempted the murder on Sergei probably disposed of the evidence And
Yep.
the best way to dispose of evidence is to leave the scene of the crime. So you go to a nearby town of, don't take any advice, listeners. You go to a nearby town or village and get rid of evidence there. If you've got no history in that town or village, then police are less likely to suspect you to move to that place, and it's easier to discard vital evidence.
Yeah, but I felt like, why didn't they just throw it away?
Because you spray a perfume bottle on someone's door handle and then go to the nearest bin. That nearest bin is most likely going to be searched by the police in their cordon limit.
But they could have thrown it out in another bin. Why was it in the recycling bin?
I'm not a KGB agent. I don't have the answers to this.
I just found it very strange that they just didn't permanently get rid of it.
I mean, if you've not got the morals to be able to say no to murdering a former Soviet spy, you probably don't care how many more victims you also lay claim to.
Yeah, well, that's true. Her parents, Dawn's parents, described her as a gentle hippie. I thought that was quite relatable, because if somebody asked, if I were to pass away and somebody asked my parents, how would you describe Sandra? They would be like, she was kind of,
gentle hippie.
What did she do with her life? She had all
mocked
these
the murdered.
No, I mean, they would be she had all these liberal ideas, She was one of those.
One of those commies.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the case. Did you have more about the poison?
I've got loads more about the poison. I was waiting for you to ask the questions about the poison.
Tell me about the poison.
So, you mentioned earlier that it was called a Novichok. These were a series of chemical weapons developed by the Soviet Union during the 1970s to the 1990s. And during that time, they were also outlawed. So the purpose of developing them in the first place was for the Cold War with the United States. And
wait, what is that? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, the Cold War. So this particular agent that they used was called A234, and there's very little scientific data available about it, how to make it, obviously, and any studies into their toxicity. But there's certain comparisons to other nerve agents that have been studied more closely. So there's another one called VX, and I think it stands for Venomous Agent 10. I'm assuming the X is Roman numerals for 10.
Clever boy.
Yeah. Can't be sure on that though. Not a doctor. Anyway, so the weapon A234 has been deemed approximately 5 to 8 times more toxic than VX. And when you look at the toxicity data, it's actually quite frightening to consider that. So the LD50, which is the lethal dose required to kill 50% of test participants, is 7 micrograms per kilogram. If you translate that into what they usually extrapolate into, which is a 70 kilogram adult male with no underlying health conditions, the lethal dose of VX is 0.49 milligrams.
Oh shit. That's so much less. So much less.
Absolutely tiny amount.
Yeah.
Now, if you imagine that A234 is 5 to 8 times that lethal, it's coming down to 0.2 milligrams via respiration to cause death. Which is why the medical staff and the police force and everybody involved in the case was so precautious about containing this case. It's why Dawn showed such severe symptoms and passed away, whereas Sergei and Yulia didn't, was because a dose of 0.2 milligrams via respiration is a lethal dose. Now, that's like 1 or 2 spritzes inhaled of a perfume, and that's enough.
That is crazy, especially thinking like how much milligrams of painkillers you take, or like
Yeah,
how
if you
much
think your
milligrams
standard dose of paracetamol is 500 milligrams, and it takes 0.2 milligrams in order to kill an average male.
Yeah, I can't. I wanted to say that's like blah 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 percent, but let's not do maths. I can't.
But also, so it's a nerve agent, which the nervous system controls your actions and your sensory information. So every kind of movement, every smell, every sight is all controlled by the nervous system. And nerve agents all act the same way in that they inhibit the nervous response in the body. And they do that by acting on what's called acetylcholinesterase. And the way that this works is in your synapses in the brain and in your body between muscles, you create a compound called acetylcholine, which is basically an instruction to either the muscle or the brain synapse to trigger. And as soon as that information has passed and the synapse or the muscle has triggered, the acetylcholine is broken down by the enzyme acetylcholinease. Now, when you've inhaled or been exposed to a nerve agent, it breaks down the acetylcholinesterase, which means that your body is constantly firing instructions to either your muscles or your brain to do something. So the most common effects of nerve agents is paralysis, because your muscles are constantly being told to act, so you go completely rigid, you can't move.
That sounds so painful.
Yeah, it's why Dawn was found foaming at the mouth, because the salivary response in the mouth is also a nervous system response, but it affects everything. So it includes your heart, it includes your diaphragm and all the muscles included for breathing, which is why this was such a big issue for the police and the medical departments, and why nerve agents have been outlawed across the world in terms of chemical warfare, because they're completely harsh, they're completely non-restrictive. The only way to treat them is for doctors to identify via a blood test the acetylcholine levels and administer drugs that counteract the effect of the nerve agent. And on the plus side, those drugs themselves are toxic in high doses.
Oh no.
So
that's like my friend who's allergic to bees, but she's also allergic to bee medicine, like the medicine you take.
Sorry. Bee medicine.
What is it called?
Anaphylactics?
Yeah. Oh, it's been a tough ride, you know. Yeah.
And the side effects get worse the longer you are exposed and untreated. So it could start with eyes watering, excessive mucus production in your nose, foaming at the mouth, localized paralysis. But the more you are untreated, the more this cholinesterase can build up in your synapses, and it just continues until, like, all of the people, Sergei, Yulia, Dawn, her boyfriend Charlie, everybody was affected in the same way, and it eventually leads to coma and, unfortunately, death.
I think maybe it wasn't that great that they thought that it was drugs at first.
Well, foaming at the mouth is also a very common side effect of a lot of overdose drugs. So it's not particularly surprising that they thought that. And I mean, most often they'll do emergency blood tests anyway, but ACTR or ACTH isn't often screened for. It's a specific test request that you'd need to ask the lab to perform. So you might not pick up on it on a normal routine blood test, which obviously then impacts the patient's rate of survival.
Yeah, and also maybe, like, I feel bad for also the hospital workers. Like, they must have been low-key poisoned as well.
Yeah, and that's why the measures were taken that the doctor told Don's mum not to touch her hair and why the pub was shut down and the restaurant was shut down. I think they replaced the roof of the house where Sergei lived.
Yeah.
I think I remember reading that.
The walls as well, I think.
Yeah.
But is that like Novichok, like could that still be found in Salisbury? Like on that bench or in that restaurant, or like
I would
could
have
traces of it still be there?
Everything would have been either decontaminated or decommissioned. I know that with other nerve agents, when a military response is called for, quite often they'll call the bomb disposal unit and things like that. For other cases that have been documented in the UK, they've actually buried the vehicles that were used to attend the response. So I'd imagine
that's crazy.
Any kind of issue with contamination now will have been dealt with, and everywhere would have been tested to a sufficient level to be able to say that it's safe.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that one of the doctors that were in, I think it was Sergei's house, he was in full hazmat suit and stuff, but he still had to get rid of all of his. Yeah. I think he got rid of all of his furniture. They had to move. It was crazy.
Yeah, it's a really, really horrible weapon.
But that's why I think that I was so surprised that they were walking and spending time outside of the house for so long before actually having symptoms.
I don't know whether it was confirmed that it was the doorknob. I know that was where the highest dose was found, or the highest concentration, but whether that was just a missed opportunity by the murderers, because I don't think it was ever established where the initial point of contact was.
Maybe not. I thought it was the doorknob, but maybe they weren't sure. Did I tell you before about one of the times when I called the police?
Which time?
Well, there was one time when I was walking in south of Sweden. I think it was on my way home or something, I don't remember. And there was this girl woman who was shouting obscenities, more or less, sitting on a stoop outside of a building. And I could see that she was foaming from the mouth. And I was like, oh shit, that can't be good. So another girl walked up to her and tried to calm her down because she was very upset. And I called the police. That's the same number in Sweden as the hospital, the emergency vehicles in general. So I called that number and I was like, yeah, there's a girl here. She's foaming from the mouth. I don't think that's good. So they sent an ambulance. I had never seen that before. I think it's a very crazy sight. When someone's foaming at the mouth, you immediately think something is very wrong here.
I immediately think rabies.
I'm sure. I don't think it was rabies. I think she was on drugs, unfortunately.
Well, it could have been nerve agent A234, and you are just as prejudiced as the police officers that attended Dawn.
I know, right?
Funny how that works.
Well, for the listeners out there, just so you know, I am not a police officer, so.
Nice save.
They would call and I would be like, where? Salisbury? Salisbury?
That's not a place.
Never heard of it. Oh, you haven't been to this wonderful town with the fantastic cathedral that has this really old clock?
Did you know its spire reaches 233.5 meters? Oh!
I would be like, is it anywhere close to Amesbury? They were like, yeah. And I would be like, doesn't make any sense. I don't even know.
Then why did you ask if it was close to Amesbury? I've got family there.
I read it somewhere on the internet. That's a place.
Listen to a really bad podcast about it.
Ooh, too close.
Ooh, self-burn.
Okay. Do you have your dinner ready now?
It was already about 20 minutes ago.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to let you eat now.
How are we going to close this wonderful Virginial podcast?
This very, very professional podcast. Well, we could just say bye.
Bye!
Bye!